About 30 minutes drive up Spanish Fort Canyon in Utah exists a small abandoned railroad town named Soldier Summit. The pass in which the town was settled was heavily used by local Native American tribes for hunting and foraging for generations, but credit for original discovery and documentation of the pass is formally granted to the Dominguez Escalante expedition into western North America. The town gets its name from a small band of soldiers stationed out of Camp Floyd that were killed in an unexpected July snowstorm in 1861. These men, along with one 14-year-old boy, were Southerners who were allowed by General Philip Cook to leave the Union Army and make their way to their home states to join the Confederacy. In 1919, a real estate developer by the name of H.C. Mears surveyed the pass and found it to be an appropriate place to start a development. So, he started selling building lots. In 1921, the city of Soldier Summit was officially incorporated. Saloons, general stores, restaurants, 2 churches, and a school were all constructed in the township of Soldier Summit. Growth in the city accelerated when the Denver and Rio Grande Western Railroad relocated their machine shops to Soldier Summit. This was done to support their railroad engines based out of the city of Helper, 23 miles to the southeast. In 1921, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, otherwise referred to as the Mormons, established a branch in Soldier Summit, and the congregation consisted of most of the population of the city until 1927. Brutal winters and high cost of living contributed to the Rio Grande Railroad's decision to move their machine shops. Other factors included the regrading of the railroad through Tucker, which decreased the angle of the railroad from 4% to 2%. This made the climb easier for the locomotives, thus the Helper engines were no longer required to be based out of Soldier Summit and could easily make their way to the town from Helper. The introduction of diesel locomotives, which had much more torque and horsepower than their steam predecessors, also encouraged the relocation of the locomotive maintenance bases to Helper. Soldier Summit's population peaked in 1927 at around 2,500 official residents. When the Rio Grande Railroad withdrew its operations from Soldier Summit in the late 1920s, most of the work left with it. The population gradually declined as railroad workers left the city in search of other work. By 1930, the town's population had reduced to just 319 people. A minor railroad operation remains in continued service at Soldier Summit to this day. Many of those that remained in Soldier Summit found work at this operation. One of the few known deposits of azokarite in North America was discovered on the northeastern corner of the town, and roughly a dozen men found work in the local azokarite mine. Azokarite is an odoriferous mineral wax, which saw extensive use in cosmetics and hygiene products such as deodorant. Azokarite was also used as an electrical insulator and as a primary ingredient in many candles. Just south of the azokarite shaft was an on-site azokarite still. The mining and stilling process involved hand-picking the soft materials from the walls of the mine, or blasting away the shale and shoveling the earth and materials into carts. If the material was embedded in shale, it was referred to as wax stone, and would require more traditional mining methods. This hand-picked wax and mined wax stone would then be transported to large coppers and boiled in water. The wax would separate from any earth and material and rise to the top of the water. The wax would then be gathered and remelted without water involved. The impurities would then be skimmed off and the material would be run into conical cylindrical molds and made into blocks or ingots of wax. In 1951, the azokarite deposits pinched out, resulting in the closure of the mine. The dozen or so men that worked the mine left in search of other work, taking their families with them. By 1980, the population of the town had been reduced to just 12 official residents. 4 community police officers maintained a speed trap in the town to desperately maintain a city budget. Motorists passing through the town complained to the Utah State Attorney General, who investigated the situation and determined that the only purpose the town still had a police force was to generate municipal revenue. Thus, the police force was disbanded and the fate of Soldier Summit was sealed. In 1984, the city was officially unincorporated. Today, only a few residents and a gas station remain at Soldier Summit. On foot, you can find a 2-cell jail. The remains of the azokarite mine, still, and tailings pond, one original home, and countless foundations. The graves of the Confederate soldiers for which the town is named can also be found on the south side of the highway. Signs mark the way to the gravesite, and a trail is marked on its edges by white rocks can lead you there. At the gravesite, you'll find the stories and the names of the individual Confederate soldiers, as well as a visitor's log.
So I'm here inside of the old schoolhouse at Soldier Summit on the northern side of the highway, Highway 6. So this schoolhouse was built in the late 1800s. It only accommodated about 25 students at any given time. And the only other schoolhouse in the area was the Thistle Schoolhouse, about 40 minutes to the west down the canyon. I'm in this schoolhouse just because obviously it's super windy outside, but I wanted to show you some really neat stuff about this schoolhouse real fast. So here in the basement you can see on the walls where there used to be ductwork,
remains of a railway power pole here. Right there is an electrical insulator. And then over here, keeping an eye out for nails, you can see the two holes. Those two holes would have been used for the chimneys for the stovepipes. There would have been a coal fire stove down here to keep the school warm in the winter. Because here in the winter you get like 2, 3, 4, sometimes even 5 feet of snow. You have to dig tunnels between the houses to get where you're going. So it gets really cold and really snowy. So every building here had a coal stove of some kind, a fire pit, and a number of other things to counter the cold. One thing you'll notice about this place is that because it's on the side of a highway, it's kind of become a dump for a lot of people to just throw their trash. Right in front of me right here, there's an old shot up 55-gallon barrel and the remains of several cars. And there's another car right there, and what's left of it is just on the other side of that. And I'll show you that here in just a second when I walk over there. You just won't be able to hear me because it's so windy, even with my little windsock on. So let's take a look at that. Here's the remains of an old pickup truck. Not sure what make or model or year, but there's another car, or part of a car right here, with some chrome trim still attached. And this would have been the main entrance of the school. So you can see that recess right there. That's where the main staircase for the main doors of the school would have been. Right here would have been the front office and lobby. Right here is where the floor would have been. And there probably would have been a reception desk right here, and then classrooms to the left and to the right. Over here, this is where one of the classrooms would have been. There would have been a small gymnasium or a small community room up here on this platform. And over here would have been 2 more classrooms, one here and one on the other side of it. Let's take a look at the floor of the community area and see what's left of it. So this is the floor of the old community area, and you can actually see in the floor where the studs would have been to support the floors of all of the classrooms in this little schoolhouse. So it's getting really windy, so let's go ahead and this is what remains of the jail that allegedly held Butch Cassidy when he was romping around in this area. Can't really see inside. We'll go around the other side, stick our head in the bars that we can actually get through. But according to local legend, this place held Butch Cassidy, which I doubt. There's no actual record of that, but we'll pretend it did. Oh no, I've been caught. So right now I'm at the remains of the original Soldier Summit Railroad Depot, where they used to station helper engines to help pull Rio Grande Railroad engines up and down the inclines of Spanish Fork Canyon. So let's go out and take a look. It's really windy, that's why I'm telling you this in the car. So let's go take a look at it. Yeah, you can actually see where the railroad and a number of other people have dumped old chemicals and solvents everywhere. They're like, oh, it's an old foundation, it doesn't matter. But the stuff that's been dumped here is going to be here for hundreds of years. This soil is pretty much ruined now because these buckets
buckets and barrels contained things like bearing grease and packing grease and oil, motor oil, bunker fuel, a number of other things. So this area is pretty much ruined for agriculture in the future, and it's actively poisoning the stuff that grazes here. Cattle have gotten sick up here in the past, but anyway, I'll get off that soapbox. Here's the old rail depot. This is obviously the basement. The offices would have been sitting on top here. This is where all the administrative offices would have been. And on the other side over there, there's the foundation to some machine shops where they would have maintained the helper engines and the other engines as well. So around us are also the remains of some of the old railroad workers' houses. So let's go look at some of those real fast. Oil filters for a train, for the big diesel engines for a train. Whoa, this is a mess. So I'm actually down here to get out of the wind so that I can talk to you about where we are. So I'm actually in what would have been the cold storage for a railroad worker. So down here in the basement of these railroad built houses, they would have had this cold storage area where they would have put all their meats, their perishables, and their other foods, and just a general storage area. You can actually see where there would have been an insulated window and probably the remains of the doorway to get into the house right there. You can see right here by this window that it's massively cracked and the ground has been actively pushing against the concrete, breaking it in half there. Well, the ground here in the 80s took record snowfall and rainfall, which saturated the soil. So this saturated dirt, can't really call it soil because it's mostly chert, limestone, dolostone, and a bunch of other sedimentary deposits, but over time it became saturated with water and its own weight started pushing the soil down slopes that were oversteepened by natural weathering and erosion processes. And in another video I talk about how that affected the town just downstream called Thistle, but that's a different video for a different time. But the ground here is always shifting. Now the railroad left this area because it was getting too expensive to keep workers up here. There was no reason to keep workers up here after they came out with diesel locomotives, because they could get up and down the canyons just fine without major helper engines like the steam locomotives needed. So they all moved to helper, they all moved to Price or Spanish Fork. So this house that we're in right now, you'll notice it's just a foundation. There's no walls up here. Well, that's because the walls are the stuff that's on the floor in here, this cheap looking wood in these piles of garbage. So basically what this is the remains of a canvas and wood house that the railroad built for their workers. And it got too cold in the winter for them to be sustainable, so they ended up leaving, packing up and going.
Okay, so we're about to head over to the Confederate cemetery site where a group of Confederate soldiers and a 14-year-old boy are buried who encountered a freak July snowstorm back at the very beginning of the Civil War. They left the then Army base Camp Floyd that was here to make their way over to the Southern Army, to the Southern states, so they could fight for their home states. Well, that storm hit them, they froze to death, they died, their bodies were recovered, and they were buried here. That's how Soldier Summit gets its name. For those that ever plan on visiting this place, you're going to come to a set of signs on the side of the road here. The left one and the right one are heavily posted, no trespassing, no hunting, all that, but you'll notice on the left sign, cemetery visitors permitted, and on the right sign, cemetery visitors permitted. If you're coming here explicitly to visit the cemetery, which I highly encourage, you're permitted to be on this property. Just don't venture anywhere else other than the cemetery, all right? So let's go look at the cemetery. Alright everybody, that concludes this episode for Soldier Summit. If you liked what you saw, go ahead and like, subscribe, share with your friends. I'd really appreciate that. Consider subscribing to my Patreon. That'll help make more episodes like this possible, and it directly contributed to me being able to make this episode today. And that's really it. That's all I've got for you. We'll see you next time. Bye!